My name is Jess, and you're listening to Seed Club's podcast. Today, I'm very excited to be joined by Seed Club alumni Flex and Commodore of Krause, the DAO that's on a mission to buy and operate an NBA team. We talk about their backgrounds in the startup world and their journey into discovering crypto, the power of community-led businesses and DAOs, and why that's a unique direction to build in today. We dive into how they're thinking about onboarding into their community, the learnings from their crowdfund, which raised 1,000 ETH in less than a week. We also talk about some of the edge cases of these new tools, specifically getting into the trade-offs to run their crowdfund on Mir, which I think is a conversation that's very interesting for those of you that are considering doing something similarly. It is a fire episode, and I cannot wait to get into it with you, so let's jump in. Gentlemen, thanks for joining me today. Flex, why don't you introduce yourself, and then we'll go over to Commodore, and then I want to hear what Krause is all about.
Yeah, I can do that. So I go by Flex. I am the co-creator of the Krause along with Commodore. We got started about 6 months ago. We have traditional kind of startup experience, mostly in the product space, me as an engineer and Commodore more on the traditional product management side. We just got super interested in DAOs, and we're like, what better thing to do than just pull together resources from all over the world and actually go buy an NBA franchise. So now we're here today, and I don't want to introduce Commodore too much. I know we have a lot to dive into, but I'll throw it over to Commodore.
Yeah, my background is in traditional startups for the last 10 plus years. Had some moderate success, and it's just sort of disheartening to think about how short on my ultimate dream of owning an NBA team and how elusive, actual entrepreneurship success looks like to get to that point. So I think when we were, really, Flex and I had a startup together that we started right at the beginning of the pandemic, which was a whole story in itself, but it was in the social audio space. Clubhouse kicked the shit out of us. An interesting product, but we're missing a lot of the pieces that we needed to scale. But we got really excited about crypto, had been sitting on the sidelines for a while, got really excited about DAOs and decided to go head first and go after our collective dream for decades at this point. And then what's been really exciting about the background in scaling startups is that we've really been able to think about scale and thinking about productizing, building out onboarding, thinking about recruiting and retention, all the different things that I think you learn in scaling a traditional startup. What's fun is, half of it is not applicable, I think, to scaling a DAO, but the other half, at least some of the principles totally are. So that's kind of been the wild journey that we've been on, and it's been super exciting.
Right. So I remember thinking back to, feels like a decade ago, but before our last cohort, and I remember seeing your application come through. And of course, we had a few conversations before that. But a DAO to buy and operate an NBA sports franchise, okay, I'm hearing that you had this lifelong dream, but that is an absurd thing. I think that's like our first conversation. I was like, this is absurd. That's when I went into the conversation with. And then I came out going it's still absurd, but okay. Cool. So can you take me a little bit on how did you get there, and what's the way that you're sort of describing Krause today?
Yeah, I can start there. Really interesting. I mean, Commodore kind of alluded to this a little bit, but we had been kind of in and out of the crypto space since, me personally, even back to 2013 or 14, right? And so as we were kind of sunsetting our last project, we were kind of asynchronously talking about, okay, what's next? And we both kind of had this hunch that it was going to be in the Web3 space. And as traditional startup builders, our initial idea was to build tooling, right? To build a product or some sort of service that people could use. And we were fascinated by DAOs. Ironically, found out about DAOs from our previous startup as it was kind of emerging. So we were just like, whoa, this is kind of the culmination of all these pillars that we find fascinating in crypto, between tokens, NFTs, online communities, all these spaces that we were really interested in for a while, and said, okay, this is our moment, right? So we were like, what better way to really dive in, because DAOs have a lot of challenges, still do. And so we thought, okay, let's jump in head first and contribute to a few and maybe start one and be on the ground floor of some of these problems and really better understand and be really close and have an intimate relationship with some of these. And then we can go out and build something. So you're probably looking at one of the weirdest pivots of all time, because we were like, hey, let's think of something really, really crazy that we would love to build as we found out some of these problem cases. And so we're like, what better way than to organize a community of fans with the goal to collectively own and operate an NBA franchise as a DAO. And so we spun it up. We weren't sure what people were going to think. Who are these guys? What is this actually, what does this mean? Are they serious? And so we got it. And it's just been kind of this slow organic growth. One of our first Discord messages was like, hey, I don't know who you guys are or what this is, but I'm in, right? And so we were like, okay, there's something here. And so I actually remember the day I was on the phone with Commodore and I was like, hey, tooling's great. There's a lot of opportunities, but this is our product. There's so many people across the world that actually want to see this thing happen. And there's a bona fide roadmap, which we'll probably get into in a second, but like there's actually a clear path. And everyone said, hey, this is wildly audacious and crazy, but there's a world where this could actually work. And that's all we really needed. As long as there's greater than a 0% chance, we're in. Let's go for it. And so that's how we really got started. And we are first time community builders, and Commodore said this a little bit earlier, but for our product experience, I think unlocks a little bit of advantage because we started treating our community as the product, not the people themselves, but like how you think about scaling, how you talk to customers, or in this case, community members, A/B testing, split testing, fast iteration. So that's been kind of, as we started to scale and grow, it's been really beneficial for us to have that background. But the original intent, to be completely transparent, was not to really go after this mission. We quickly realized, okay, this is a thing, but it was really to kind of get intimate relationship and really figure out community and some other opportunities in the space. So kind of a wild story of how this thing started. Commodore may have more to add, but it's kind of interesting how it came about.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is that when we first were having the phone conversation doing it, I think I was in my backyard chipping some golf balls on my AirPods, and we started breaking down I think Flex was like, well, dude, like, okay, like, all right, like, how would a general manager work? And then we would just be like, all right. And then we would just sort of think about all the things that we've learned about crypto and be like, okay, well, maybe there is a general manager, but maybe he's like beholden to a DAO and they vote on that. And maybe it's big decisions and maybe you slowly decentralize that. And we're like, okay. What about branding? And it was like, well, okay, you run bounty. And what was just amazing about the kind of problem space, and I've experienced this with building startups that have had product market fit, is it feels like every challenging problem, if you sit there and kind of ideate on it, you start to get like a directional path to say, oh, like that's actually kind of solvable. And when you're able to do that, I think you sort of have idea market fit, and then you're able to say, okay, there is a path here. Yes, it's audacious. Yes, there's going to be a lot of interesting journeys that we go on the side. But, that conversation, we felt like we kept knocking down interesting walls. We had no idea how we were going to get there. We needed to build a community to go do that. And to Flex's point, a lot of talented people that were super motivated joined and started saying like, okay, like I have an idea how to solve a legal challenge. I have an idea how to solve, a general management, and the rest is history.
The rest is history. Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of history to be made here. We often sort of frame and I think actually in large part to working with you guys through our last cohort and being really thinking through what is the thing that just so appealing despite the pragmatic side of my brain being like, are you guys kidding me? The appeal was like, this is an adventure that people want to go on. Right. And so this idea of a call to adventure being a core thing that we're looking for at Seed Club was really framed, I think, and you can sort of see it really come to fruition with things like Constitution DAO and Cabin DAO and, a whole host of other projects that we've worked with is sort of embedded in there. And I think to hear that you sort of stumbled onto that call to adventure through a right or left turn at some point, I think is really interesting because to me, the other storyline that really stands out is that idea of building with community rather than building for community. And I think we're still in this phase right now where we haven't fully internalized what that means and what the true benefits of that are. But when I look at how you guys are going out and building community and sort of seeing like the things that come out in such an unexpected way that are so much cooler than I think anybody individually would have been able to sort of grok, to me, this is just an entirely new way for us to go build startups. Community being the place that products and ideas and inspiration emerge from that we then collectively go execute on rather than let's go find that internal locus of innovation and then go build community around it. Do you agree with that? And are there any instances like from within your last 6 months that really highlight that community building approach?
Yeah, I'll take a shot at my first pass on it. I mean, I've told all of my founder friends had, quite a bit, I think, success of building startups that I think that we are entering in this sort of bimodal distribution of the two paths that you can really go as a kind of a founder type personality. I think that what we're starting to see is that you have a collection of technical innovations that have, true improvements and true defendability in a technical component that's the fundamental advantage, the unique value prop that the startups are going to succeed on. I think those types of startups are going to continue to succeed. My former co-founder, who I started 3 companies with, he was our CTO. He was very much always thinking about every type of startup that we ever did in that lens of like, what is the technical advantage that we have to win? And him and I would often have these conversations, and I felt a little bit opposite. There's this other side of it. And it's kind of this product market fit thing. And it was always a little fuzzy for me to be able to articulate and define. But it was just sort of saying, like, if you're tackling an interesting problem and you're solving those problems repeatedly and you're building automated solutions to solve that, you'll sort of build this emergent product that will then give you the unique defendability or unique value proposition. But his point was always like, well, you could just copy that, right? And so I think that was the era that startups have started to go in the last 5 to 10 years. Is that, you have the Amazons and the Googles and they're these unicorn type companies that have a technical advantage or an operational advantage, just fundamentally different. And those are going to continue to be amazing businesses. What I think this DAO space and specifically is almost like social area that I think we're talking about is I think that's going to be the other dominant pattern that's going to succeed on the opposite side of that technical innovation. And it's to say, hey, this is the big, broad vision or mission. This is the type of identity that people tend to either build or organically, or it's part of that kind of core group of people that found it. And it's this adventure. And I think we've saw that, bits and pieces of that with like Wall Street Bets, right? A kind of pre-DAO space of just saying like, these are a type of people that are doing a type of thing and they just have an identity attached to that. And that is what allowing them to participate. I think that this space, and I think Krause House fits into that, is going to be a pattern that we're going to see being a really unique value proposition for those types of entities to compete. And so now all of a sudden, if you're trying to build something, anything in this world, and you're not really into those two modes, I think you're going to have a really, really hard challenge, because unless you have a technical advantage, which is really, really hard to come by, it's sort of like the patent strategy of yesteryears. Or if you don't have a community, like you need to try to build a community. That's just like, that's going to be a really hard no man's land in the between. There's certainly be a bunch of winners, but I think that space is going to be really challenging. So that's how I see it as an entrepreneur broadly.
I love that framing. And I'm very curious, what do you see as being different today than before that enables the second path?
I mean, so there's that second bucket of kind of the social DAO type ecosystem and whatnot.
Yeah. Why hasn't that happened before and why are we seeing it now?
I think personally, there's probably two answers. I think one is I think that a lot of the people that, like Flex and I included, who were in the sidelines, call it the 2017 time periods, who invested not a large amount of money, but some percentage of your sort of net worth into something like that. Now that because of Ethereum and Bitcoin have risen so large, is that you have an opportunity to take some of that and say, okay, like what else can we do in this ecosystem? So I think that the group of people that believed in that general ethos also now have a little bit of capital to go play and explore with that. The second thing is like, as that number became more and more mainstream, you had people, my parents don't own any crypto yet, but my dad's certainly interested, right? And my dad's like 75 years old. So I also think that crypto broadly had started to have more product market fit. People started to get wallets, feel comfortable with the idea of even owning something like Bitcoin or Ethereum, which now you say, okay, if the general population, which we're probably still very in the early adopter stage, but we've hit now some sort of critical mass with the global stage, I think there's just enough people now as well that feel comfortable enough with loading some money into a wallet, some ETH, and participating in some of these things. And we have platforms like Discord that have set that foundation.
Maybe even stepping down a level, right? Highlighting on the importance of communities. I've noticed that as a builder, over time, product teams have started to become commoditized a bit, meaning that between API startups, SDKs, as engineers, we've built ourselves into a really interesting time where as little as 10 or 15 years ago, spinning up your own server and taking payments might have taken years. With AWS and Stripe, you can do that in a couple hours. And so what is the next layer of defendability? I don't even think it's necessarily coming up with a technical defense. It's more about distribution now, because these, in general, between these products and services that are so readily available, how do you get the word out about what you're doing? So we've seen this shift. We see this actually in the creator economy, especially. They're kind of leading the charge here, which is like people no longer want to have high brand affinity. They have human affinity. We've moved into this human-centric type model. I think we saw that with individual creators, but now we're seeing that with businesses. They want to see who's behind all this. And I'm not talking one or two people. I'm like, what does the community look like? Right. And so I think there's been a square peg round hole effect for these companies that are now trying to catch up on community. And it just kind of seems phony. But I think what's really interesting about Web3 is that we've led with community. Right. And I think that's what makes it so interesting. A lot of these people, they might attach themselves to an idea, but I've joined DAOs because of the people that are behind them. Under a pseudonym or not, it's like I enjoy thought leadership and I look at the community more so than I look at what is actually being built per se. Not all the time, but like a lot of times I will see, hey, it's a combination of both, when before it's just been behind a brand logo. And I think kind of seeing this general zeitgeist movement to this human-centric focus rather than just product and logos.
so many moving parts. So what's coming up for me is that saying, and I don't know who says it, but first-time founders worry about product, second-time founders worry about distribution. I think that comes out quite a bit. And I think like the underlying point there that I think you're making is that you're essentially combining creation and distribution, and we're calling that community. The idea would be that you would be able to have a much more successful launch of anything sports tech related, given that you have 100 or 10,000 members who actually give a shit about sports and tech that are owners and bought in. And I think the point that I see get missed so often, and that I think even we in this conversation, when we're either too deep down the rabbit hole or we're not even remotely looking at the rabbit hole, is the idea of tokens representing ownership in communities. Like, it's just such a fundamental shift that is very easy to overlook, I think. And really what you're leaning into here is saying, yes, we are going to bring people together. We're going to represent their participation, ownership, and value and stake in this thing through this token that's not beholden to any platform out there, where we can point that energy and have that sort of that meta layer of alignment be at that token level. And we believe cool things will sort of happen from there. And I think that's, what we're seeing in early stages of, and obviously ridiculously bullish on that, given all the work we do at Seed Club. But 2 weeks ago, I think that I was watching the crowdfund that you guys did. That was the narrative that was going through my mind, was like, big adventure, come be a part of that adventure. Here's your ticket to that adventure. And there's 1,000 ETH into a treasury, not to go buy the NBA sports team, but to be a part of a community that's going to go figure out how to buy a sports team and operate a sports team and be a part of this broader adventure. So maybe we can sort of zoom to that a little bit. Actually, I don't want to jump right to that. I think there's been a few things that I've seen you guys do that have, really blown me away. And I think one is, you said you're first-time community builders, and yet you've done an exceptional job at building community. And two, there's sort of been this unique challenge that projects that are kind of going after that broader market, which I think you really are, right? It's sort of more pop culture, if you will. It's not even pop culture, like sports. People like sports. I'd love if you could maybe share a little bit about how you approach community building and really double click in on this sort of onboarding process that so many people are talking about in DAOs right now. And that I think we can agree is still a very big barrier to getting people into these adventures that we're excited about.
Yeah, I can start with that one. By the way, massive shout out to some of our other core contributors, Mario and Eli. Really did an awesome job. We kind of set up some guardrails and had some ideas, but they really tackled that amazing. And we think we have the opportunity to be one of the best in class onboarding, and they've done a great job there. Man, I have so many thoughts around this, but I'll try to keep it specifically to onboarding. One of the things that I've kind of had this emergent thought, right, is like, from a traditional and centralized world, particularly in startups, because that's our background, is there's this emphasis to be bigger. Let's get more users. Let's get more revenue. Let's get a higher employee headcount. Let's get more data points. And because the opportunity to join DAOs is relatively a low barrier, right? You're looking at these amazing DAOs that are popping up to solve these really big missions, or even, protocol-based DAOs that you just believe in the product or service that they're building. It's relatively easy to join. So really, our goal is to actually make the DAO feel smaller than it is. You're not walking in on day one saying, oh, cool, I just joined a community of 2,000 people. What you're really doing is saying, hey, I joined a community of 50 other Knicks fans, or 25 other developers, or 100 people that are 5 out of 10 as far as crypto knowledge base, right? And so really what you do is you're saying, hey, I'm in here with 30 other people that are really on the same journey as me. So we kind of look at through the lens of, like you said, an adventure, and we've used the analogy of MMORPGs. You can either come in, hang out, or you can join a guild, or you can hop in this project. You can just talk hoops if you want, right? And so really what do you think is, like, finding your squad sooner than later, we think is a really good tactic. So to tie this back to onboarding, we've set up draft classes, so anywhere I think from 15 or 20 people, that immediately they're going through this orientation together. And so from that point in, they each get a PO-up with their draft class. They start talking about ideas. They name their draft class. So immediately they have a small group of people that they can relate to off the jump. They immediately identify themselves as a part of this draft class, rather than saying, oh, I'm one of 2,500 people in the Krause house. And I think the further that you can kind of bifurcate the community and make them feel like they're part of these little niche squads and groups, then they're more likely to contribute. They're more likely to hop into discussions. They're more likely to guild up and actually build amazing things. So that's really kind of the lens that we've looked at this through. And I think that's where we're going to continue to explore and expound on that.
I love that, highlighting that point, because I think a Web 2 point of view, like, I think what growth marketers was the word that really comes out of like, how do you create value in Web 2? You growth hack. You hack and you grow. And I mean, sorry to anybody who's a growth hacker out there. Like it just seems like, let's just call it thin and lacking substance. And I didn't know I was going to be spicy on this. I have opinions on growth hacking. Who knew? But I think like one thing I always share with a lot of our teams is like the largest social token projects right now have 10,000 token holders. Like we're not talking about hundreds of thousands or millions here. And truly, like anything that has grown successful grew from a small core, not from a massive base already, which I think is, again, another insight that we've had in continuing working through projects at Seed Club is that actually if you have 1 million, 2 million, 5 million people, that's a huge liability in trying to get people in. I think for the point that you're making here specifically, which is people need to find their feet. They need to find their people. They need to feel comfortable in a noisy, chaotic world, which is Discord. And frankly, DAOs generally, no matter what tech comes out, like there's going to be that aspect of like you're being dropped into the middle of IBM without any onboarding or whatever. It's crazy. And so being able to chunk down into these smaller groups, I'm curious, like what other things have you done or insights have you had around building that sense of connection that, led to some really interesting emergent behaviors, such as people yellowing in on a fairly large level?
I would say that one of our other pieces that we stepped into, it was probably half intentional, half just part of what we were going to go do, was the podcast. I'm a big believer that every single DAO should have a podcast that's being regularly published to. And, there's certainly some challenges with it, but I think what we've been really surprised and pleasantly surprised is that, it's a format that is easy to consume. You can do it asynchronously. You can do it while you're doing dishes, while on a walk for the dog, commuting, like whatever. And if you do it with an entertainment lens, but also are conveying important information as well as kind of like work through the actual challenges, as opposed to it sort of being a, meeting notes, like here's the 7 things that we were discussed and here's what we're trying to do. And just actually having a human conversation about, hey, like here's some cool stuff that happened and here's some of the challenges we're working through. Is like, anyone out there have any ideas? And then being able to take that and then bring that into the Discord experience. To me, that is like a pattern that every social DAO should absolutely be using. And we're quite frankly looking at spinning up, 5, 10 different podcasts. Now that might be too much, but we've just been thinking about like, okay, what about at the level of just, NBA sports gambling as it relates to crypto? Okay, that might be interesting to our broader audience that has, not about Krause House, but that's a space, format, and medium that's very accessible for the people who are in the DAO that might be interested in that. And so I just think this idea of using kind of that mechanism and talking about it in a very genuine way, leaving it open, and then you follow up in the Discord is a super powerful pattern.
So are you recording podcasts specifically for your community, or is it for broad consumption? Or are you doing both?
Yeah, so the podcast started with us just sort of like open sourcing the challenge of what we were trying to do, which is like, hey, we're trying to buy an NBA team. Let's just interview people that might have advice on it. Let's just talk in public about the problems that we're having. And like, it was really just sort of like a learn by doing and just journaling. But instead of us writing these long blog posts, let's just talk about it. So that was sort of the beginning of it. And then of course, like as important things happen, that's where I think your question kind of drives a little bit more, is like we would then share those things and then talk with those things. Another podcast popped up by Mario and Magnus, who are super involved in their community, called the Jerry's Digest. That was a little bit more tactical, like, okay, here's all the things that did happen. And, I don't know the exact numbers on that podcast as well, but, you certainly start to run into like, what should this podcast be about? What should this other podcast be about? But I would say as you're getting to that first kind of level of scale, just simply having a spot that people can all listen to and all be on the same page. And then, do that with your synchronous kind of town halls and those types of spaces. That just feels like the glue that we're able to either bring back, inactive members, be like, oh, I was listening to the podcast. I didn't realize you guys were doing XYZ. I'm back. Like, how can I help with that particular thing? It's just a really powerful mechanic.
Yeah, just to kind of double down on that too. It's like Krause House specifically, and even social DAOs more broadly, particular one that are in the kind of a culture umbrella, call it music, art, sports. We just have the potential to onboard millions of people into this world of crypto, right? And so I think because the risk for starting and building content is so low, but the impact is so high, then I think having a broad media strategy actually does wonders for communities. We're talking about NBA analytics podcast, a WNBA podcast, a DAO specific podcast, because why not, right? And so if we can onboard these specific people, bring them into this broader ecosystem, and no matter what their level of competency in crypto, we can put them on a track to kind of bring them into this community more broadly. And so that's really kind of our underlying thesis too, because spinning up a podcast is, relatively low barrier. There's a bunch of tools and services that allow you to do that a lot easier. So we figured, why not? If someone wants to come to us and say, hey, I really want to talk about women's basketball. I think it's an area that's untapped, and I think that there's a massive community that could come over. Can I leverage the Krause House brand to do that? We would be all for it.
Yeah, I think this falls into these like three big buckets that just keep coming up in my mind when you think about how do you go build a valuable social DAO. It's one, the sense of membership and belonging. Yeah, I want to hold on to this token or be a part of this community. Two, it's capital, right? You need to be able to pay people or do things or have the resources to, go for beers every once in a while or order pizza, and then, or whatever the digital equivalent of that is. And then three, it's distribution. Was there leverage coming out of being a part of this community? And yeah, I think you're going to see most DAOs be the major content creators moving forward. It might not just be content creator DAOs, they'll be sort of spinning out of like these ecosystems that you guys are talking about here. So I think that's super interesting. I love that every one of these points you make, I have 4 other threads I want to pull on. So, okay, let's go to the crowdfund. You saw some early traction. At what point did you make a decision that you wanted to capitalize the DAO? And maybe take us through a little bit of the high level of that process. Let's assume most people don't know that you guys had a wildly successful crowdfund recently.
So we basically had this idea of tickets to the Krause House, and we were really excited about all the different creative spaces that you could kind of do to make that happen. So we really wanted this idea of like, hey, you buy a ticket, you're part of this experience, and you think about, an actual stadium and an actual game. Every single person that walks in through those doors, like they were there that night for that, that game and that experience, and they were there to watch these players perform and to cheer and to boo and, just be a part of that whole thing. And we just felt like that was such a powerful mental model that we wanted to tap into. The other piece that was super interesting about that is that you also, in a basketball stadium, you have all these social experiences, right? You might have an area that's sort of like a, this bar club thing, right? There's the courtside tickets, there's the, the normal stands, there's the nosebleeds, there's like all this sort of variation. And again, everyone is a fan, everyone is there watching a game, but they have sort of different levels of access or intimacy, slightly different experiences, little nuances to that. And we just thought that was such a fascinating space that we wanted to explore to really tap into this idea of like you're coming into Krause House, stadium type idea. And so we worked with an awesome designer, which he snowed, and we really came up with these tickets. And we really just said, hey, like, what is our kind of journey? And I think it's important just to touch on what our journey is. You alluded it to a little bit before, which was kind of phase 1 is we want to build out a really strong community. I think we're kind of in the late stages of at least the first order of scale of that journey. Phase 2 is really about how do we do experimentations in decentralized operations of sports teams. And there's a lot of very simple, low-hanging fruit. You might have a minority position in a majority NBA team or something like that. You might even buy a majority position in a small league and actually do different type of experiments. We felt like getting expertise and understanding how to run and operate a team is super important. And then that third phase is you use those first two, the talented community and the kind of the traction and roadmap and credibility that you've built up over that time to put forth a bid. And we think that those are sort of the ingredients that are necessary for the NBA to say yes. We think that, you do the Constitution DAO model, snap your fingers, $3 billion in a juice box, and you say, okay, we're ready to do it. NBAs are like, how do you run this thing? And that's what we really set out to prove. So that's really the kind of the foundation of the NFT sale, was to say, hey, like we're looking for people that believe in this, that want to help us build this. We want phase 2 is now up. We need to start figuring out what we want to go and do in that. We have a bunch of really fun, cool ideas, but we also want to see who from the community wants to roll their sleeves up and build with us. And I think that is the very, very beginning. We just kicked off our season 2. That's the very, very beginning of us exploring all the different kind of creative space that we can play into that.
I think there could be like a full podcast on just pulling apart the crowdfund, because I think, executed it extremely well. And I think we'll be looking back on that as sort of a teaching moment for many teams moving forward. I'm very curious about specifically, like, why did you choose to go down the path working with Mir? I know a lot of tactical decisions because I saw you guys go back and forth and really spent a lot of time figuring this out. Can you just maybe drill down a little bit more on some of those decisions there?
Yeah, happy to do that. Ultimately, 2 things that ended up materializing the decision to go with Mir. I think one is we threw out all kinds of ideas on how to do this. And I think, again, with our products hats on, I was like, okay, there's a 10 out of 10 experience here that we could build. We probably got a quarter of the way down that road to the point where we were doing mock-ups, talking to developers. And ultimately, we decided, like, look, we built enough products where there's delays, there's bugs, things don't quite work out. There's a lot of testing involved. we don't want to kind of have our rose-colored glasses on with these deadlines. And so we said, hey, look, what is our number one goal for this crowdfund? And I think it ultimately came down to speed. Like, we want to do this in a way where we can get people involved in the community, get them in the doors, and let's run. And so we thought Mirror was the best option for that. And so we can quickly do it. There's been a lot of successful crowdfunds on Mirror. M Club being one of them, obviously. Infinite Garden, right? Like Black Hands by Searsu. We're like, hey, it's been validated. The team is awesome. Let's do that. And so that's one of our decisions. The second one, I think I actually just kind of touched on, was that the team is awesome, right? We knew that we would have our back, and they were great as far as facilitating things, not only before, but during and after as well. And so we felt like they were kind of like partners in this journey that we could kind of rely on as this thing was coming to fruition. In the event that there was this massive blitz in scale, which happened, I think, a few times during the crowdfund, they would be ready to rock right there with us. And so those were the two things, at least in my head, that ultimately came to that decision to use Mirror, which I think in hindsight was the exact right decision to make.
I'm curious what the downsides of it are, because I think what a tool like Mirror and so many others that are kind of emerging that allow they're consumer products ultimately, like you can just spin them up and launch them and they work. That's great. But there's trade-offs in absolutely everything that we do in the crypto space, especially in DAOs. And I think that can be one of the hard parts about trying to build, is that a thing might look great on the surface, but then there are a couple things that are sort of maybe make it a no-go. And usually within Mirror, it's the sort of tying of token distributions in with NFTs, and then also trying to communicate that clearly. Was that the case for you, or like were there other sort of things that were maybe not quite the way that you'd want them to be?
So there's probably a handful. One of them is the fee. I think it's a 2.5% fee, which is, that's a material amount, especially as you're trying to do something incredible with that. I mean, it's a great team and all those pieces, and they've built a lot of great functionality. Certainly a consideration. The second one is like, you certainly lose a bunch of creativity in delivering exactly what it was that you wanted to do. So we certainly had a vision that we wanted to outline with the execution of like how the NFTs would work. In our world, here's an example, is that like, if you wanted to buy 10 club levels at 1 ETH, then you would just click, order 10, click buy, and then you'd charge 10 ETH, and then you'd get 10 NFTs. But the way that Mirror is thinking about it is a little bit differently, where that would be a one transaction, which would make you eligible for their kind of podium fee. And so, there's a lot of sort of technical choices that they made that make sense, I think, for the average use case. And so you have to readapt, I think, your strategy to fit that average use case. But I think, when you kind of stack it up on the pros and cons, and that's what I think Flex was alluding to, before, it's like, for the most part, we wanted to bring our own token was another thing that we wanted to do. And that's not an option currently for us to do. And the way that like Podium exactly worked and how we wanted to structure that and kind of breaking these down, those were some challenges that we had to reconfigure. But I think, now having gone through it and taking a look at it, I mean, Mirror provided a really, in my opinion, a really trustworthy structure, sort of like I kind of think about the safe note in the traditional startups, right? It's like, a lot of startups use a safe note, and a lot of, venture and it's like, so it's like there's this standardized object. And what I really liked about Mirror in that regard is like, this is a standard object. Like, people have participated in these Mirror NFT sales. Mirror has done transfer. Like, there's a lot of trust and stability in that mechanism, which I think is really, really important. And so the speed is the other piece of it. So it checked enough boxes. We were able to make a few changes. We were able to explain to the community what exactly was happening. There's certainly some edge cases that we're kind of having to go through it and support kind of in a manual way. But the good news is, those are relatively small and few and far between, and they're not, particularly material at scale. So I think in hindsight, if you're looking for speed and stability, it's really the best way to go.
Yeah, I love you just going through that, because it's an awesome thing. People are coming to the space, right? Like, we have so many new DAOs that are being launched, so many new people excited about DAOs. There's still such an evolution that's required from across everything, right? But product specifically. And so without a doubt, the Mirror team is wonderful, but I want to always make sure we're highlighting where the edges are of these things, because I think A, that's where a ton of opportunity lies, and B, we're probably part of that market cycle right now where people have these overinflated expectations and are like, this is what I'm going to go do, all these sort of things, and don't recognize the number of, it's hard. You guys were wildly successful. The crowdfund hit 200 ETH in 15 minutes? People were like kind of crazy, and then it kind of slowly was growing up from there. And then one morning I wake up and all of a sudden you've gone from, I don't know what it was, but to 1,000 ETH, it seems like in a blink of an eye. What was your sense of what was going on there? And did that hit your expectations? Were you blown away? 1,000 ETH?
Man, I think I would be flat out lying if I didn't say we were like a little surprised at one point, especially the speed. Once we hit over that 50% mark, right? I don't know if it was 400 or 450 or something around that, but I think as soon as we toppled over 50%, it was just, I don't know whether it was the FOMO really kicking in or what, but we were able to cross the finish line there relatively quickly. A lot of people asked about the gap. Normally you see 80 soft cap, 100 hard cap, right? And the thought process behind there is Commodore and I put a lot of time into like, hey, what is the minimum amount where I think we could pay core contributors, get some of these projects started and move? And we felt that comfortably was around 200. And then obviously the 1,000 was like, okay, what is the actual maximum, right? Where you start to get into maybe some valuation issues there. And so once we hit that 200, we were really excited. As soon as we went live, I didn't really want to look. And Commodore was like, hey, we're at 156. We were on the phone. I was like, 156,000 USD. That's not bad. We just launched this thing. And he goes, no, 156 ETH. And I was like, oh, wow, okay. So I was like, all right, well, glad some people want in. It was kind of a journey. One thing that I think is worth mentioning, and I brought this up actually on a Seed Club alumni call, is I think we prepared properly before, although we were both out separately and a little bit of overlap with some personal things going on. But I think we relatively prepared before and during. I don't think we were prepared for the after effects between help desk related stuff, inbound of partnerships, Twitter DMs. I don't think we were fully prepared to be answering all those. And I think for the in-laws and the family at Thanksgiving, it was not ideal. We got some side eyes because we were on Discord all day, but I think in hindsight, it was probably worth it.
Yeah. Shout out to my significant other who I basically missed a lot of Thanksgiving over. Yeah, it's the life, I guess.
I identify with that so much too. Shout out to my significant other. Love you. So I like this. So, we last week we did, or the week before last, we did the pool suite drop. Did very well. But my big lesson coming out of that was like, it sounds kind of weird, but like plan for success. And I think it's so easy to get into these things, and you're like, but you just don't have a point of reference, right? And even if Constitution DAO did this or whatever, like you can't even really make those as like. There's so many different criteria or contexts that are playing out there that it's very hard to sort of know where you're going to land. And so, there's a good chance that you get, I know, like we had conversations, right? Like there was this debate, like it was a very real possibility that you wouldn't even hit your basic cap. Like that is, I'm sure within the line of a possibility that you guys were thinking. And yet you maxed out within a week, and that success requires you to engage with the world at a whole other level. I know from some of our DMs back and forth, you guys are being a little coy around some of those partnerships or like the interests that are coming in. So I recognize that you might not want to share or can't share all of those right now, but successful crowdfund, you're sort of digging out from the excitement of that. What is the next 3-6 months look like for you guys? What's that roadmap?
I think one thing to highlight, again, coming from the startup world is, you hear entrepreneurs all the time, they raise a bunch of capital to go do something audacious, and, all of the kind of the press and their friends and family are like, congrats. And a lot of the entrepreneurs, are sending them DMs like, hey, congrats, man. Like, good luck with the body of work that's ahead of you, right? And that going back to being, first time founder versus second time founder and so on and so forth is that I think we both understand that this is, really just the beginning. I mean, if anything, this is just the beginning of that next chapter of scale for us. And there's going to be a lot of headaches, opportunities, and things for us to go tackle. And so, I think that there's some maturity in this journey as well, where, I think you mentioned of like, how blown away were you? I mean, it's also the human condition, right? I'm like, okay, like this happened, and like, this is now the stakes are higher. I think the pressure is higher. We need to move a little bit quicker. We need to, move faster. There's a certain comfort in being lower and where you're achieving your goal. And so I think you have to fight through human nature to say, no, this is a great fucking thing. And you grab that opportunity, by the horns and you ride it. So, for us, it's really about that phase 2. It's about how do we prove out that decentralized operations of sports teams. And some of that's going to be digital, and some of that's going to be in the physical real world. And so it's us aligning all of those opportunities, putting forth the strategy for the community on why that's the thing we should do, and going after it and making it happen.
There's a shift of roadmap and things that we want to go build, but my guess is that there's also sort of capacity building and infrastructure and growing the organization that's going to allow you to get there. I'm curious how you're thinking about that. So you said, one of these funds is to pay your core contributors. Can you give us a little bit of a insight into how you're thinking of structuring work and compensation within Krause House?
Yeah. I can start with, I think, a little bit around the structure piece. I think what we do, again, putting our product hats on, is like we really think about these seasons, right, as a nice iterative approach. I think seasons are pretty popular within the DAO community, and I think for all the right reasons, right? It's a good way to kind of chunk these bodies of work, possibly have an off season, which is like a wind down period, a retrospective, and then what did you learn that you can apply to the next one, and what worked really well, what didn't work so well. I think we have two big findings, right, is that we've tried to do these large team bases, and I think for Discord channels they're okay, but I think structural, right, smaller teams tend to work better together, right? That's more autonomous, smaller teams usually can move faster, less bureaucratic, rather than having something like a media team. It's like, okay, what does a podcast team look like? What does a social team look like? What does a video content creation team look like? And so really kind of leaning into that structurally has been a big unlock for us. Also, I think smaller seasons, right? Really taking this as an iterative approach and saying like, look, how can we not necessarily complete projects within these windows, but how do you achieve big milestones within these windows, right? And I think that's important. Like, for example, we have a grassroots NOLA project, which is essentially, long story short, Gail Benson, who's the owner of the Pelicans and the Saints down in New Orleans, has mentioned that she's open to selling the team, right? And there's some stipulations there. And it's kind of our first way to kind of build some reps around that. So this has been spanning across seasons where we may not go be minority owners in the Pelicans in a couple months, but having some key milestones of like, can we get in touch with podcast hosts and beat writers in that area? Can we talk to the general counsel of the Pelicans on why this is a good idea for the team, right? And so setting those up in infrastructure that way has been really helped. So I think those two things is how we kind of think about, it's like, what kind of guilds, squads, small teams can we form to actually go do this? And then what are these milestones within a short window of time that we can actually look back and say, okay, cool, we've accomplished that. And if we didn't, how can we fix that and right the ship to go into next season? So I think structurally, those kind of things that we're looking at, amongst other things too. But I think those are probably the two biggest things that we've noticed in our experience with seasons. I think we're rounding out. We're on season 2, but we had a summer league as well, which is our short season to kick things off. So technically the third season.
And how are you thinking of, like, in my mind, like, the thing that is valuable or most valuable in these communities is people who can take responsibility and deliver outcomes. And there's often a fairly big gap between like the people's desire to participate and be a member and be associated with, and that like actual delivering of value. And so, this is why we see so many fairly small teams. I mean, not maybe by a traditional business standpoint, but like core groups of folks who are contributing the vast majority of value, and to the point where I almost look at like most DAOs is like the organizational structure looking more like a dumbbell, where you have like a small number of people creating a large per capita amount of value on one side, and then on the other side you have this large amount of people that are creating a small amount of value. And I think obviously there's like a lot of crossover between those. But how are you thinking about, from a structure standpoint, is there a measurement aspect? Are you seeing people deliver on things? Is that tied into the compensation? How are you actually ensuring things get done?
Yeah, it's a really hard challenge. I think every single DAO has. So, I mean, when you kind of think about the meta challenges, everyone's facing it. I think the strategy that we're going to propose, and this is something, sort of being worked on through governance, but is really, it's like, how do you build out some core team to make sure that DAO operations are operating? And I think about this DAO operations as this sort of kind of catch-all of all the stuff that we're sort of talking about, of how do you think about onboarding? How do you think about the legal entity of it? How do you do accounting? How do you do payroll? How do you do the governance? Right? Like what are all the mechanisms that make sure this DAO continues to operate against the broader mission and vision that we're going after? There's no sort of, I think there's other work streams that are much more, bounty or project driven, to say we need to accomplish this very sort of scoped thing. It might be more of an engineering or design task, and we need a team of folks to work on that. And that is going to compensate in a particular way. And then we have this other bucket that we're super interested in exploring, is a sort of sub DAO, grant. I don't know. I think of the Peter Thiel grant. What's it, Peter Thiel? It's like the Peter Thiel grant or something like that he does, where they basically put a small amount of capital into people that
fellowship.
They think the fellowship. I think it's a really interesting model also in the DAO space. We've had some incredibly talented people say, hey, look, like, here's my background in Web 2. I'm learning a bunch of Web 3. I love Krause, and I just kind of want to go explore governance, or I want to go explore developing Discord bots or whatever it is. I think there's this interesting thing to sort of have really smart people that are kind of in almost an academic sense, exploring problem spaces for the DAO that aren't necessarily project related, and they're not necessarily core team members working on some of the DAO operations or the key functionality that needs to happen. So I feel like DAOs, at least in the way that we're structuring at Krause House is to really be thoughtful about each one of those buckets, build compensation mechanisms that align with each one of those sort of use cases that we need, and then iterate and experiment through the seasons. And I think that's the other part, is that each one of these buckets, I sort of think about them as being these segments of saying, like, okay, you have a core team within this season, and let's reevaluate everything that went right or wrong with the compensation and the structure and the powers and the permissions. And then let's re-add it up again for the next season. And then you're doing that across all of these different dimensions. So I imagine that we're going to have a really kind of nuanced sort of compensation structure depending on what your talent you have, what the bandwidth you have, and where the kind of opportunity alignment is with the DAO.
One thing worth highlighting too is possibly even our first product coming out of the Krause House is this concept of how do you reward commitment? DAOs by nature, right, are kind of steer themselves more towards liquid contribution rather than full-time contribution, right? There's so many DAOs, they're easy to join. I think the majority of people are spanning themselves across multiple DAOs. And so this commitment thing is kind of nuanced. The majority of the people are not going to be full-time employees with some sort of contract, right? It lives off liquid contribution, right? That's going to be the majority of the work getting done. So instead of punishing or getting discouraged with people that don't contribute or maybe fall in and out, how do you reward the people that do? And so I think there's multiple ways to do that, right? There's kind of these intrinsic rewards for doing that, like either reputation-based rewards, and there's also extrinsic, right, which is rewarding with tokens or other sort of monetary. And I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think the combination of rewarding people by saying, hey, you need a website built. I got a team of 3. We're actually going to do this, and the deliverables in 6 months. I think that in a centralized organization is expected. But I think it should be rewarded in like a DAO ecosystem. I think it's kind of an inverse way of thinking, but it's super important for this broader DAO ecosystem to grow.
Yeah, I love that. I love having these conversations because it just starts to highlight how many exciting opportunities that are out there, right? Like there's just so much to figure out here. And that is not discouraging to me in the slightest. That is the most exciting thing, period. Because, I think we can argue that things are working right now-ish. We're still new. There's a whole lot of hope and prayers. And yet, every day more brilliant people come into the space. There's more tools being built. There's more communities being formed. And I think, one of the reasons why I'm so bullish on what you guys are building here is because not only do I see this community value and the strong adventure, but I truly believe you're going to, spin out some industry supportive redefining tools that, we at Seed Club and our other projects will be able to use as well. So super excited about that. We're coming up on the hour here. I know we have some time constraints. I could talk to you guys for much longer. So I'm going to leave it with a selfish question because why not? Like, this is selfish. Like, I'm going to be selfish for a second here. Why the hell did you guys join Seed Club? And what'd you get out of it?
Yeah, I could take that one. We actually get that question a lot. Not the why the hell. It's just like, hey, tell me more about Seed Club. I think the benefits are quite obvious. Yeah, exactly. It's less about, hey, why are you guys crazy for joining? What I love about Seed Club, and this is what I tell everybody, is that I would be wary of anyone that claims to be a bona fide expert in anything in this space right now. The way that it's moving at hyperspeed and the way that the most talented people are thinking about it, they're thinking about it with very soft mental models, right? It's a bend, not break mental model. And being willing to adapt your ideologies and how you think of things is the priority right now. You can't be stuck with anything and stuck with any sort of frameworks because it's just moving too fast and there's so many things to figure out. And so what I loved about Seed Club is that everything as far as the resourcing and the breakout sessions and things like that, it was not how to do XYZ. It was a cohort-based, hey, let's figure this out together. And if you are interested in doing this thing, we can put you in touch with anybody in crypto. The Seed Club Mafia runs deep here, if you guys didn't know. There's a lot of people there that they know and have access to. So we were like, Commodore is super interested on, things like DAO infrastructure and compensation and legal and things like that. I tend to look at things more from, product and services and growth and partnerships. And I think that there's nobody in Seed Club that is not a degree of separation away because there's no X's and O's right now. There's no tactics, right? It's all experimentation. And I think going through that with cohort and people roughly at your level and also having that community to lean on makes it invaluable if you are growing or starting a DAO.
Yeah, and I would just add that I think this idea of thinking about your kind of sort of broader token strategy and how you allocate and whatnot, if you're thinking about it from a zero sum game perspective in Web3, you're already not going to make it. And so I think that part of this journey is aligning yourself with people that not only share a vision for what you're trying to accomplish, but just share the values and, some may call it the vibes of what you're trying to do. And I think that that is really, really important. And so we had a lot of great conversations with you and the team that I just felt like there was a lot of value alignment. And I think that to me personally was almost more important than necessarily, where the vision alignment or the execution alignment or the exact, pragmatic trade of saying, we get X in exchange for Y. And so it's just this very collaborative belief of saying like, hey, broadly speaking, we think we can do this collectively. And if you guys think that's cool and we share some similar values, then let's team up and let's learn. And that's just sort of adding onto everything that Flex was saying, is that I think this is, broadly speaking, take away each, incubator, each DAO, each everything. We're broadly speaking a group of people that's really not that big against the giant population of the world that is literally trying to change the world together. And we're going to make mistakes and we're going to make, all these different detours and whatnot. But that's, I think, the number one most exciting thing about the people in crypto that are actually building towards that better future, is that if you have alignment with those folks, like, team up with them and go change the fucking world. And that's why we joined Seed Club.
I love it. Well, we are privileged to have you guys a part of the community. I had a moment about 2 weeks into the last cohort where I realized just the immense value that we're going to build as more folks like you become stakeholders in our community and help steward the next and the next and the next and the next versions of these projects alongside the building that you're doing in the numerous ways that I know that you guys will go have a big impact. So we're very excited to have you a part of it and to count you as soon to be owners of Seed Club as well. And I'm a very proud Krause House token holder, both individually and through Seed Club as well. So guys, I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to spend it here with us on the Club podcast. Where can people find you on the internet? What's the best first touch point?
Best way is probably on Twitter, Krause House DAO, and then or krausehouse.club, which is kind of our website plus the entry into our Discord.
Awesome. Give the guys a follow. Join the Krause House. There's, if only for the onboarding process, and at least to start poking around. But I think as you'll see from this conversation, there's just a number of things that these guys are thinking about quite deeply that should be valuable to both experience and to continue to learn alongside. Flex, Commodore, appreciate the work you guys have done, both within Krause House and within the Seed Club community, and very excited to continue to build with you into the future. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Jess.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jess.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jess.